Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Poland has a new president. Karol Nawrocki was sworn in on Wednesday, and his inaugural speech signals what to expect from his term. And to talk about the new head of state, we're joined by Jowanka Jakubek Lalik, Associate Professor at the University of Warsaw. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, what are your first thoughts after listening? I guess you listened to the president's inaugural speech.
There were actually two speeches, both of them quite important, yesterday when he was taking office. So first speech was in the parliament. It was this inaugural speech that you are referring to. And then there was a second one, which was actually directed to the military, because in Polish constitution, the president also is the civil commander-in-chief of the armed forces. I think that both of these speeches were quite interesting because they showed not only his political program, political agenda, but also his plans when it comes to the cooperation with the government, and also his plans when it comes to, let's say, intervening in policy making, because we also need to explain that Polish president actually has a more of a representative role, and his competences are quite limited. The government is in charge of policy making. Therefore, this kind of political program, political agenda means that there will be quite difficult cooperation and rivalry between the government and the president.
Rivalry between the president and the government, that doesn't sound good. And, well, the Prime Minister was rather disappointed with Karol Nawrocki's inaugural speech in the Parliament. So, you predict it will be a difficult cohabitation?
Well, I would say that the tone of the speech was quite confrontational, meaning that President Nawrocki has very kind of concrete policy preferences and policy choices, and his objective is actually to have his goals and preferences achieved. So it means that it might be a big challenge for the government to cooperate and collaborate with the president. However, also from the legal perspective, I need to underline that there is a legal obligation in the Constitution of Poland to cooperate for all the public authorities, and especially those who are taking the most important offices, to collaborate, so they always need to find ways to cooperate with each other.
Therefore, my following question, because today Donald Tusk said he would react ruthlessly to any presidential attempt to obstruct the works of his government. So what ruthless measures had he in his mind?
What kind of ruthless measures, I'm not sure. However, when it comes to the legal instruments that the Prime Minister has, they might be quite limited, because president in Polish system has blocking power, veto power when it comes to the acts of parliament. And in order to kind of combat this veto power, the parliament would need to have the 3/5 majority, which the current government does not hold. So it might be a challenge to overcome this kind of barriers that the president could install in front of the government decision-making processes. So I would say that, of course, in the more optimistic scenario, there will be just constructive criticism of both sides, but in the end of the day, both parties should agree on the common objectives and common goals when it comes to the internal and external policy making. However, the dominant voice always belongs to the government, because it is the government who is the manager of public policy making. It's also administrator of all these important policies. So the final voice always belongs to the government, and the president should listen to the government. I will also mention one more legal instrument, which is also quite interesting. So in Polish constitution, we have a body which is called the Cabinet Council. It's composed of all the Council of Ministers plus the president who is acting, let's say, as the head of this cabinet council. However, this cabinet council is not entitled to take decisions. So it's only for consultation purposes, to get updated, and also for the president to actively support the government. The president declared that he's going to use this instrument quite often, and I do hope that this instrument will be used for this positive purpose, so to support the policies of the government.
Or to criticize the Prime Minister in public. Now, speaking of which, Donald Tusk has his people in the government, his coalition partners. So what do we know about Karol Nawrocki's team of aides?
Indeed, we already know the most important names in the office of the president. The vast majority of them are quite young people, I have to say, so 30, 40-year-olds. Some of them have political background in the Law and Justice Party, so the party that was in the former government, currently in opposition. However, some of them are also the people who were working with Karol Nawrocki in his previous function when he was the head of the Institute for Remembrance, Polish Institute for Remembrance. So they are historians, they are political scientists and political figures as well, but from the younger generation nevertheless. So what I would expect is also the change of style in the presidency. We can see from the profile of his closest of the people who he is going to cooperate with, that they also have different experiences and different personalities. Some of them are quite hawkish, I would say. So one of the examples is the head of the security aspects, the security agenda in presidential office. However, there are also some politicians who maybe are not that confrontational, and there will be also possibility for the government, especially in the field of foreign policy, to agree on some most important priorities.
Nevertheless, the vast majority of them are strictly connected to Law and Justice, the former ruling party in Poland. The former president has been dubbed a pen man by his opponents, right? Because of supporting almost all the initiatives of the former government. Now, do you think that Karol Nawrocki will also follow, the heat of Jarosław Kaczyński, or will he try to establish a more independent term of his own?
I'm sure that the style of presidency will be very different to what we are used to looking back at Andrzej Duda's presidency and his legacy of 10 years in the office. So Karol Nawrocki is a much more dynamic politician, and for sure he's bringing his own policy ideas and policy preferences to the table, which Andrzej Duda was not really famous for. Also, his personality, his, let's say, more confrontational style of policy making might also mean some more challenges when it comes to the cooperation between the government and the president. But also, I think that Karol Nawrocki is signaling the change in generations when it comes to Polish politics, because for the more than 20 years, we have been divided into two political groups, which were actually rooted in even communist era, but also in 1990s. And two leaders of two opposing camps are actually 70-year-old gentlemen, meaning that the new generation of politicians are coming. And also what we learned from the elections, presidential elections, especially from the first round, is that a lot of people actually are looking forward to new faces, new ideas, and they are quite tired about this duopoly that was ruling Poland for the last 20 years.
Well, still, Karol Nawrocki couldn't even dream of winning this presidency, if not for the backing of Jarosław Kaczyński. Now, the new president also said that he would, quote, not promote or nominate any judges that undermine the legal order. Now, what does it mean in terms of the rule of law, dispute which the current government was able to somehow end with the European Commission? Now, what does these words signal?
Thank you for bringing this topic because it's very relevant and very important. I'm not sure actually what the president meant by saying that, because from my perspective, being a lawyer and academic, restoring rule of law is #1 priority, and the current government is trying to do that in line with the European Commission and other international standards, the Venice Commission, Council of Europe, and so on. So if President Nawrocki is ready to support the government in restoring the rule of law, that would be very good news. However, from the tone of the speech, I'm not sure that that was his intention, and the other explanation might be that he understands rule of law differently to the international standards, and also some other topics, and the way that he was speaking also highlights different political agenda. So it's just several days ago I had a speech at the International Conference for Public Law, and I was speaking about neo-authoritarians and populist politicians in European countries. And actually, from the speech, Karol Nawrocki is ticking some of the boxes of these characteristics. So I'm afraid that this kind of sovereignty concentrated, and also these topics that he was bringing to the speeches mean that this new era of populist politicians is also present now in Poland.
And lastly, shortly, will Karol Nawrocki continue his predecessor's policy when it comes to Ukraine?
Here we again are not certain, because Andrzej Duda was very pro-Ukraine when it comes to supporting Ukraine in the light of the Russian aggression. Karol Nawrocki seems to be much more Ukraine skeptic, let's say. So his speeches during the electoral campaign were much more distanced from openly supporting Ukraine. However, being in office means something totally different than being on the campaign track. So I would suspect that Karol Nawrocki, having the whole understanding of the Polish foreign policy choices and preferences and the position of our country, allies from Western Europe and from the Anglo-Saxon world, would also mean that his attitude will be much more positive, and he will also be able to find ways to cooperate with the Ukrainian government and support the government unconditionally in terms of Russian aggression.
We shall see in the near future. Jowanka Jakubek Lalik, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Warsaw, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.